Okay, today's topic is locked in. What is locked in? Is it the temperature? Is it all the stuff that is going to happen once the Earth warms up by 1.5 or 2 or maybe even 3 degrees? We don't know. I feel locked in because I've been thinking about personal transportation a lot lately, and I feel locked in because I need my car twice a week to drive a semi-long distance, like 30 kilometers or something like that. And I cannot buy a BEV, nor would I want to at this moment, because, because of the manufacturing footprint of the car. So I keep my old car, but I'm fully aware of the fact that it's still putting out 160 grams per kilometer. And then there's the issue of there being 1 billion cars in the world. And I was thinking about per capita energy consumption and such, and then I realized, well, most cars are in the OECD, at least. The car ownership is more prevalent in the OECD if you look at it from, a per 100 or per 1,000 people than in the non-OECD. And I realized that one of the big problems that we are going to have to address is that people will become more mobile. Naturally, a lot of people will buy a bike, a lot of people will buy mopeds or scooters, but also a lot of people will be buying cars. And we are not decarbonizing the fossil fuel industry fast enough. Now, there's all these people who are saying, well, fossil fuels are becoming increasingly more expensive because of renewables. And there's all kinds of schemes to keep them afloat. Well, if you ask me, those schemes are required because if you look at France, for instance, where the carbon tax has now been introduced and the so-called yellow shirts are protesting, it shows you that people who are dependent on the availability of fossil fuels for transportation they basically don't have valid alternatives to, start using something else. So this means that we are locked in. We are locked into fossil fuel consumption for cars. BEVs are not going to change a thing. I read that Volkswagen had secured enough materials or money or deals to create batteries for 50 million BEVs. But here's the thing, they're not going to build 50 million BEVs a year. Now, this is for 50 million BEVs over a couple of decades. Now, 50 million BEVs is actually just 5% of all the cars on the planet. If we would replace, 50 million cars with BEVs, that wouldn't even register in terms of emissions. So that's why I'm feeling locked in right now. If a company like Volkswagen, which is an automotive giant, cannot get enough batteries to build 50 million BEVs a year, then we're never going to BEVify all the cars on the planet. And naturally, people are saying, well, we're slowly moving off lithium and we're moving towards solid-state batteries, but The problems will always be the same. It's a supply chain problem. It's not a problem of will or money. Well, it slightly is a problem of money, of course, but supply chains have to be built up, and sometimes it takes decades to build up supply chains to create enough materials to satiate a market. And the battery market has been satiated for a long time. I mean, let's look at home appliances, let's look at power tools, laptops, phones, cars. We've been making a lot of batteries for ages already, and we are still trying to figure out how to make a cheaper or more reliable battery, try to squeeze in a couple percent more energy density, which is already at a maximum, I might add. So this whole BEV thing, people are advertising it as the second coming of Christ, which it isn't. Just like renewables, we all face the same problems. Since we are talking about very low energy density, production of energy and consumption of energy, it automatically implies that you need a lot of materials to capture and store all this energy. And the supply chains simply aren't there. And the supply chains are not being ramped up to such an extent that it is going to make a difference. So if you look at batteries for cars, these things have been, it has become increasingly more difficult for certain companies to get batteries for electric vehicles. And this means that they cannot lower the price of this battery electric vehicle. And this also means that since the demand is higher than the production for batteries, that the batteries remain relatively expensive. And it logically follows that if lithium-ion batteries, which are now the norm in BEVs, cannot satiate the demand and resource problems keep stacking up, that people will start to look for different battery technologies, solid-state batteries, for instance. But there's no guarantee that these will be a panacea. Last week I read this article about somebody developing a carbon and a hydrogen battery. Now these are two ubiquitous elements and we can get them dirt cheap. But we are using carbon and we're using hydrogen. And not just any old hydrogen, no, hydrogen gas. So a hydrogen gas battery, what could possibly go wrong, right? And then there's the question, what didn't they tell us? And then there's the question, what didn't they tell us? What other constituent is in that battery? Is it just graphite and hydrogen atoms, or does it have to do something? Is there a cathode and an anode? I mean, what are the constituents of this battery? Nobody knows. Nobody told us. We only know carbon and hydrogen. So it sounds really promising. It's too easy to get. It's too easy to get materials, or easy to get. It sounds easy enough. It's too easy to get elements, right? But I don't know. The day when they say we can build 100 million car batteries a year, I'd say finally we're starting to get somewhere. But then problem B arises. How are we going to charge this new infrastructure of battery electric vehicles? And then everybody says, well, it's solar panels, of course. We slap on some solar panels on our roof and we build a battery in our home and we charge our car overnight from the juice that we created over day. And when we're away, the battery charges up again and we get home and we charge our car. But we all know that's not going to happen. I mean, imagine 10 billion cars, or imagine a billion cars a day, consuming somewhere between consuming somewhere between, I don't know, 50 and 100 kilowatt hours per day. Oh, I'm doing this out of the top of my head, by the way. This is completely ad-lib. And suppose that all these cars, so each car requires, let's say, 50 kilowatt hours. A panel, a 300 watt panel, delivers about 3,600. Let's see, 3,600. That's 36 times 2,600 watt hours a day. Yeah. So it delivers 600 watt hours a day, which means that you need 100 of these panels. Yeah, 50 kilowatt hours. 600 watt hours times 10, yeah, 100. You need about 100 of those panels, give or take. So each roof on each house is going to be 100 panels? I don't think so. So where else is the energy coming from? Well, the answer is obvious. We need utility scale electricity to do that. A utility scale solar PV, that's like Topaz kind. Then we're talking about the Topaz kind of, solar plants. The Topaz solar plant costs about $1 billion, I believe. $1 billion, $1 billion too. I don't know. Well, let's see. So the Topaz PV plant cost about $2.5 billion for 550 megawatts. So, I mean, not only are we now talking about billion-dollar scale PV schemes, we are talking about endless square miles of good farmland or desert land or wherever you want to put up your EV, your grid scale EV plant. And yeah, it's not going to matter. We don't build this stuff quick enough. And even though people say, oh, it's so dirt cheap, and just the economics of scale, it's so cheap, and we throw money at it and nothing will go wrong. Well, you're wrong. You see, the Germans have already thrown 500 billion euros, I think. More than 500 billion euros. Not million, but billion. And they have hardly put a dent in their carbon footprint. And that's because we keep consuming goods. Putting carbon-free electricity onto a grid is one thing, but it doesn't tell you the entire story, because all we do, everything we can buy in a store, has a carbon footprint, of which some is electricity, but most is fossil fuel. Well, since it's electricity, it's also fossil fuel. So it's fossil fuel, and a little bit of low carbon energy, basically. So, yes, I'm feeling locked in at this moment. The non-OECD is catching up. These people want these people want better lives. Better lives means that they will be catching up with us. They will become increasingly more prosperous in terms of energy availability. And energy availability equals goods availability and services availability and amenities availability. And sure, it's possible to give these people a PV panel and a battery and some kit in order to make sure that their children can read at night and that they can turn on a radio or perhaps a TV. Don't think about things like clothing irons or washing machines or freezers or refrigerators. That's not going to happen. These people are not going to run their household on one PV panel only. They are going to require grid connections to get all the juice they need for these contraptions that will use electricity. And they're going to need all the juice that we can give them. To buy a bicycle, to buy soap, to buy food, to buy a computer, to buy a car, all these things. So, yes, we are locked in. At this moment, the anti-nuclear crowd is making a ruckus again, at least in the Netherlands. They're misinforming the people by telling everybody that nuclear power is expensive. And all they do is point at the outliers, Hinkley C and Vogel and Olkiluoto, even though that thing got finished. So, yeah, what we see right now is more delays. And the longer we delay, we keep kicking the ball forward instead of running with it. The longer we will, the more we will ensure that we will be locked in. So that's my my lamentation of today. I don't think that you like I don't think that you like watching this kind of video. But I felt that I needed to make it because I'm not feeling optimistic at this moment. So, thank you all for watching and have a nice day.